All right. That should mean our online audience has joined us. Welcome, y'all. Welcome all of you. My name is Bonnie Brzozowski. I'm a public services librarian here at the Corvallis-Benton County Public Library. I'd like to welcome you to today's random review. Thank you all so much for being here, for braving the cold to be here. I want to just take a moment to thank all the folks that helped make Random Review possible. I'd like to thank our Random Review Committee. If you don't already know, it's a committee of about 9 folks who come together once a year to select books and reviewers for this 10-month series. A special thanks to Gary Whitehouse for writing our fabulous press releases. I also want to thank the Friends of the Library Group for their co-sponsorship and support of Random Review. I'm sure you probably all know by now that they founded and ran the Random Review series for 30 years before the library started coordinating it. They also coordinate and run book sales whose funds benefit the library, and they support the library in a lot of other ways. So if you want to learn more about them and you want to join or volunteer, please do at their website. And I should update this because it's the Friends and Foundation. Oh my gosh, thank you. I'm glad Deborah's here to make my contact with me on that. I completely forgot. Our Friends and Foundation have merged. So it's actually officially the Friends and Foundation of the library. And they now have a website. I know if you go to friendsofthecbclibrary.org, it will direct you to the Friends and Foundation website, but I'll get that updated in my intro and actually have the correct website in the future. If you're not familiar, I also want to mention our Random Review webpage. It's at cbcpl.net/random-review. There's also a big button for it on our homepage. And on that page, you can find the Random Review schedule of events, a list of books that are related to each book reviewed that's compiled by our volunteer, Gail Gerdeman. And some of those books are actually in the back available for you to check out. You can also find on the Random Review webpage audio recordings of each of these events. So if you want to listen later or you want to share this with others, you can do so from that page. And the audio recordings also get posted to the library's YouTube channel. And then if you haven't heard, this year we are also streaming all Random Reviews live. So if you don't want to come here, you can watch it at home during the Random Review hour. And the link to that live stream is on the Random Review webpage. Okay, so let's get to our main event today, sooner rather than later. Today, we've invited Jennifer Richter to review Poetry Unbound, 50 Poems to Open Your World by Padraig Ó Tuama. I'm actually on the Random Review Committee, and I'm the one who nominated this particular book. Over the last few years, I've been spending a lot more time reading poetry, and I've been exploring poetry anthologies to try to discover new poets. And what I've found is that actually a lot of poetry anthologies and collections by multiple authors tend to collect the same poems and same poets over and over and over again. But then I stumbled on the Poetry Unbound collection, and it's really an anthology unlike any I've ever read. It includes a really diverse set of poets and poems, a lot that I had never heard of before and got really interested in. But on top of it, it includes Ó Tuama's personal reflections and stories related to the poems, as well as this really keen analysis of each poem. It's really amazing. From there, I discovered that he also has a podcast, the Poetry Unbound podcast, which I highly recommend. And I also signed up for his email newsletter. So I'm officially a really huge fan. Ó Tuama has a really unique, kind, and warm voice, and I love looking at poetry through his eyes. He sees things in poems that I don't always see, while also helping me learn how to be a more engaged and interested poetry reader. He encourages me to slow down and open my eyes and my ears. When the committee voted that we would do this random review of Poetry Unbound, I immediately thought of Jennifer as the reviewer. Jennifer is not only a poet, she's also a really incredibly warm and kind person, much like Padraig. Every time I run into her or communicate with her, she is unhurried, calm, friendly, genuinely curious. So I think Padraig and Jennifer actually share a similar energy, in my opinion. And it would be a bit of a dream come true to me if someday Padraig would break down one of Jen's poems in a Poetry Unbound episode. So, help me write to him with suggestions for one of her poems that you should talk about, because it would be really cool. I don't want to drone on too much because I'm sure Jen has a lot to tell us about Padraig, as well as a lot more about the book. But I do want to tell you just a few of Jen's credentials, and then I will let her take it away. So if you don't know, Jennifer Richter is a poet and the Associate Professor of English and Creative Writing at Oregon State University. Jennifer's third poetry collection, Dear Future, won the 10th Gate Prize for Mid-Career Poets, and it was published in May 2024. And if you want to check it out, that's too bad. I have it at home. So you can place it on hold. Richter's first collection, called Threshold, was a national bestseller, and it was chosen for publication by former U.S. Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey. And I have two of Natasha's works in the back if you're curious to explore her. Threshold was a national bestseller, and it was, I already said that. Both Threshold and Richter's second collection, No Acute Distress, which is wonderful, were named Oregon Book Award finalists. Richter is a Chicago native who attended Indiana University for her bachelor's degree and Penn State University for her Master of Fine Arts degree in poetry writing. She moved to the West Coast 30 years ago, and she was awarded a Wallace Stegner Fellowship and Jones Lectureship in Poetry by Stanford University. And for the past 13 years, she's taught in Oregon State's MFA program with her husband, the novelist Keith Scribner, who's actually joined us today. Let's welcome Jen.
Bonnie, thank you. What a beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it. And I feel the same. I feel like we could talk for an hour about how much we like and appreciate each other. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here with you all. Thanks for coming. And really happy to that you, Bonnie, introduced me to this book because I didn't know about it. I knew of Padraig Ó Tuama a little bit from the podcast, but I was so happy to know this book. I'm so happy to introduce it to you today. As Bonnie mentioned, this book is an anthology, meaning a kind of, in this case, a very diverse lineup of many poems by many poets. It's kind of like a poetry buffet, which is really great because you can, page through it. It's the perfect book to carry along with you through your day, to put on your bedside table. Because in this case, there's one poem per poet. I'll show you a little in a minute about how the book is set up, but it's so easy to just page through it, come to a poem, read it, absorb it, appreciate it, sit with it, and then move on into your day. You can really easily dip in and out of it, and I appreciate that. And I haven't, there are many poems and poets I didn't know about, which I also really appreciated, and there's not a poem in here that I don't really deeply admire. The editor of this anthology, Padraig Ó Tuama, is an Irish theologian, conflict mediator, poet, and podcast host. Here he is. Oh, doesn't he look friendly? As Bonnie mentioned, the anthology is titled after his podcast, Poetry Unbound, which is a joint project with the American broadcaster Krista Tippett, who you may have heard of, who launched the On Being Project and hosts that podcast. There we go. The Poetry Unbound podcast launched in 2020, just before lockdown started. The producers were hoping for 30,000 downloads in their first season. That's how they measure the success of these podcasts, I guess. And they exceeded 1 million. Now the podcast just wrapped its 8th season, and the podcast has more than 7 million downloads now. But you don't need to know any of that to appreciate this book. That's all backstory. It's a book, you don't even need to have ever read a poem in your life. I mean, Bonnie, you know, right? Like it's so wonderfully accessible, but still really smart and insightful, that it really doesn't ask anything of you except a kind of willingness to go there, to be transported by these poems and to listen to a little bit of what Otuma has to say about them. As the title tells you, he's collected, kind of curated 50 poems. And what's interesting about, I was saying to Bonnie that I feel like these days, if you're going to pull together an anthology, do something new, right? She's right, there are so many anthologies with the same poets, same people. Something that he's done that's really interesting is he's got 50 poems. But he sandwiches each poem with two things. First, on a page, and the printing is really lovely too. So you'll see these black pages, and those precede every poem. And on those black pages, it's what Otuma calls an anecdote of how I've needed poetry in my life. So they're short, right? A little paragraph or so. A kind of personal introduction, right? If Padraig was here, this is maybe what he would say to you before you read it. And then we get the poem itself. And then, as Bonnie mentioned, we get a short essay usually about the poet's life and craft, some craft element that he's interested in, but short, maybe 3-4 pages or so. So the format of the book is really unique and accessible. But more than anything, I feel like what welcomes you in, as we've talked about, is his voice. If you haven't listened to his voice on the podcast, go home and do that after this. He has this amazing, like, Irish lilt that will talk you into doing anything. I would follow that guy anywhere just because of his voice. But what's really great is that his welcoming tone shows up on the page too. You don't have to have heard his voice, his audio voice, to appreciate his written voice. I want to just read you a few short passages from his introduction so you get a little taste of that voice. So he explains in introducing the collection, the poets in Poetry Unbound are from many places: Jamaica, Ireland, the United States, Australia, Iran, Puerto Rico, England, Israel. Included are poets from the diaspora, colonized countries, occupied countries, poets in exile, poets who've never traveled much, and poets who've been forced to travel to or through many places. Many of the poets hold more than one national identity. There's no such thing as one global universal voice. We contain multitudes, as Walt Whitman asserted. I chose these 50 poems because together they help us to see what can happen when we pay attention to our lives. The poems are not designed to make your life easier, though many of them will. They're designed to notice and observe, to take stock, to reckon, to breathe, to rest, to stir and work. And then here's a paragraph of how his introduction ends. Perhaps you've loved poetry but haven't known where to start. Perhaps you've wanted to try your hand at having a conversation with a poem. Perhaps the sheer choice of what to read overwhelms you, or you're burdened by the memories of school examinations that seem to flatten the life of any poem. These poems are for you, to read when you can't sleep, to learn and recite on a bus or train journey, to bring into a classroom, to accompany you in a crisis, to offer to a friend. When a poem lands in your life, it really lands, adding new richness and texture to your world. I know of no greater gift than when someone tells me they turned to a poem of mine or a poem by another poet during a time of importance or an occasion, a funeral, a wedding, an anniversary. I consider myself lucky now to stand at the doorway to this anthology saying hello, inviting you to these great, brilliant poems with stories of your own. The poems are eager to meet you too. I mean, that's maybe the warmest welcome to a book I've ever read. So just in terms of the structure of the book, he explains in his intro that he's curated them to resemble an exploration, is what he calls it. And that the book moves through themes of self-acceptance, memory, love, empowerment, identity, family, and faith before returning to poems about the self and resilience. And from this buffet of a book, I've made you a little plate of 4 poems. I'm going to serve up 4 poems to you from the book. Before I read the poem, I'm going to read Otuma's intro to the poem. I'll read the text of the poem and I'll put it up on the PowerPoint too. And then I'll share just a little nugget from Otuma's essay that follows the poem, and I'll add a little chunk of my own thoughts to that. And I should say, I'm really happy to take questions along the way, but I also will absolutely save time at the end for that, if you'd prefer that. Okay, I wanted to start where the book starts, the very first poem. This is a poem by Ada Limon, who you may have heard of. Here she is. Her poem is called Wonder Woman. Ada Limon is the author of 6 books of poetry. She's been awarded a MacArthur Genius Fellowship. She was a Time Magazine Woman of the Year. And she wrote a poem that was engraved on NASA's Europa Clipper spacecraft that was launched to the second moon of Jupiter in October 2024. Most notably, she's our current poet laureate of the United States. Here's Otuma's brief introduction to her poem, Wonder Woman. I've had a Wonder Woman belt buckle for the last 10 years. Often people have asked, do you wear it because you need the strength? Mostly I wear it because I like it. But also I wear it because growing up, the message was that boys shouldn't be interested in Wonder Woman. But I adored her. Comic book characters are silly in a certain sense, but not entirely. They reveal us. They reveal the imagination, notions of power, of possibility, of how to live in constraint. Wonder Woman. Standing at the swell of the muddy Mississippi after the urgent care doctor had just said, well, sometimes shit happens, I fell fast and hard for New Orleans all over again. Pain pills swirled in the purse along with a spell for later. It's taken a while for me to admit I'm in a raging battle with my body, a spinal column 35 degrees bent, vertigo that comes and goes like a DC Comics villain nobody can kill. Invisible pain is both a blessing and a curse. You always look so happy, said a stranger once as I shifted to my good side, grinning. But that day, alone on the riverbank, brass blaring from the steamboat Natchez, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a girl, maybe half my age, dressed for no apparent reason as Wonder Woman. She strutted by in all her strength and glory, invincible, eternal. And when I stood to clap, because who wouldn't have, she bowed and posed like she knew I needed a myth, a woman by a river, indestructible. In Otuma's short essay that follows, he reminds us, and this is a quote, Wonder Woman is a mythological character, a fictional superhero from DC Comics. Superhero language is echoed elsewhere in the poem, with Vertigo being described as, quote, a villain nobody can kill. Important to remember is that a myth is not something false. Rather, a myth is something with so much truth, it needs a fantastical container. And I really like that. A myth is something with so much truth that it needs a fantastical container. I would argue that there are a number of universal truths in this poem, including the lines that feel to me like the kind of heart of the poem. At the bottom of this slide where Limon says, invisible pain is both a blessing and a curse. And I love that line break at both, right? She asks you to pause there for a second, and we'll talk about line breaks too in the next poem. I'm interested in the fact that this poem is grounded in an incredibly specific place. One that's perhaps very unfamiliar to us, right? If you haven't been to New Orleans, if you haven't stood on the banks of the Mississippi there and watched this particular paddle boat. But even though it's so specific and grounded in place, it speaks universally. Because invisible pain is a truth that we all know. One of those truths that that Otuma is referring to, so much truth that needs a fantastical container. The invisible pain we've experienced might be a physical pain, like this particular speaker is experiencing. It might be an emotional pain that we're hiding inside. Pain, as you know, has the power to turn us inward. Sometimes just to get through a day, it requires a kind of self-absorption, a kind of turning in and kind of soldiering on. What I love about this speaker here is that rather than looking down into her purse at her meds or turning away from the world somehow out of frustration or exhaustion or grief, all of which would be totally understandable, she remains open, taking it all in. Here she is at the banks of the Mississippi. She's hearing the brass band from the steamboat. And finally, out of the corner of her eye, this surprising, fabulous girl in a Wonder Woman costume. The poem reads to me, it's a beautiful first poem of an anthology. Poets think a whole lot about first poems of books. Editors think a whole lot about how they're going to introduce a collection to you in an anthology. And this one feels to me like a wonderful, essential reminder to look up and look around and move through the world with curiosity, to remain open to the possibility that on any given day, if you're paying attention, something you glimpse out of the corner of your eye might just save you. Okay, this next poem is one that's in a lot of anthologies, but I still love it. It's one of my favorites by a poet, James Wright. The poem is called A Blessing. It's such a, oh, yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to reflect on that poem.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
No, I don't have a reflection per se, but I'm just wondering, everything has a reason. And so why do you suppose it's written in New Orleans or about New Orleans? Have you thought about why that setting? Is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. I mean, the poets absolutely thought a lot about that and has chosen that for a reason. I mean, I don't know the truth. I can tell you what I think when I read it, which is I've been to New Orleans once, and for me, and so I automatically kind of bring that. I remember a very lively energy, and I remember music all the time in the streets, and so this brass band for me does a lot of work here. That it's creating a. I mean, there's a liveliness to the scene that I think if it were on the bank of Walden Pond, like okay, but that's. That doesn't feel as a lot. Part of what's important is that there's a kind of like vivacity and energy in this setting that sort of serves up Wonder Woman, right? Wonder Woman showing up on Walden Pond, maybe not, right? But I feel like this setting makes that possible. Like, what do you think?
Oh, just you're making me think that there's a lot to grab her attention anyway. So she looks up for the band and then she sees this.
That's right.
It still goes with the theme that you're saying. Do you suppose, this is a stupid question. Do you suppose that this is an actual experience that she had? Is she ill? Was she?
Right. So I do happen to know that she, yes, she has She talks about it, she writes about it. It's no secret that she does have spinal problems. And she's written a fair amount about it, really beautifully and articulately. And so, right, this is no surprise if you've read other poems of hers. I really like the specificity of a spinal column 35 degrees bent, you know, that's not just, oh, I've got this kind of general problem. I'll tell you, you know, this is how specific this is my issue and that I'm living with. And, you know, and I think, you know, Otuma talks about in his essay about how the language is dialed up, right? That vertigo becomes a villain. And even words like I'm in a raging battle with my body, right? That feels like dialed up language that matches the kind of superhero image of Wonder Woman. And so it's an interesting, yeah, she comes at that subject in many different ways. And this feels to me like as a poet, like another way in, right? Another, like maybe she won't ever be done writing about that because she's never done living it, but that this is one way to, and one, like, as you say, I think there is part of the setting is the distraction, as you say, which is being able to look up and out from her body and kind of forget herself for the moment and see what else is out there. I think that's hard to do some days. Yeah. Other questions before we move on from this? Okay. All right, here's our friend James Wright. He is one of the few poets included in the collection who isn't with us any longer. He died in 1980. He was from Martins Ferry, Ohio, this tiny town where they still hold an annual James Wright Poetry Festival that I've been to. He published 9 poetry collections in his lifetime, and he's frequently referred to as one of America's finest contemporary poets. Here's Otuma's introduction. I've loved nature poetry all my life, but never felt inclined to write it. I never felt like I had the emotional relationship with the landscape that'd make my writing any more than plain description. I grew up in the countryside and took long walks throughout my teenage years, from our townland named after the ruined castle to the shore where an old round fortress stood. Still, I never felt the urge to write nature poetry. Maybe it's a stage of life, maybe it's the pandemic. Again, this was compiled during the pandemic. It came out in 2023, but the podcast launched in 2020. Maybe it's the loss of a friend who used to phone me up saying, the goldfinches have returned, but I'm writing poems about nature now and reading them even more. Okay, this poem is called A Blessing. Just off the highway to Rochester, Minnesota, twilight bounds softly forth on the grass, and the eyes of those 2 Indian ponies darken with kindness. They have come gladly out of the willows to welcome my friend and me. We step over the barbed wire into the pasture where they have been grazing all day alone. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness that we have come. They bow shyly as wet swans. They love each other. There is no loneliness like theirs. At home once more, they begin munching the young tufts of spring in the darkness. I would like to hold the slenderer one in my arms, for she has walked over to me and nuzzled my left hand. She's black and white. Her mane falls wild on her forehead, and the light breeze moves me to caress her long ear that is delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. Suddenly, I realize that if I stepped out of my body, I would break into blossom. Spring's on the way. In his essay, Otuma gives us a little more context. He says, James Wright, a U.S. Army veteran, had a difficult life. This poem appeared in a collection titled The Branch Will Not Break, published in 1963, which considers the Second World War and its impact on him. In many of the poems, he's out in nature, troubling what has sometimes been called human nature: death, decay, war, kindness, and consolation. Why are they lonely? Because they are alive. Why are they happy? Because they are alive. Are we talking about the ponies, or are we talking about the men? We are. There's so much, I think, to admire in this poem. I love the tenderness of the tone, and there's even just the word twilight, I think, gives the poem a kind of hush. It's a poem I teach often. Any level of student finds something to love here. When I teach my intro workshops, I'm encouraging my students to make big leaps in their poems and go to surprising new places. But I remind them that if they're going to do that, they need to bring the reader along. And one way to do that is to give the reader a really solid, kind of grounded launch pad from which to launch with you. And I use this as an example because you don't get a much more grounded launch pad than just off the highway to Rochester, Minnesota, right? James Wright is like, okay, here we are, right? We're settled here. You got this, and kind of reveals line by line the scene before, of course, this incredibly surprising, beautiful final two lines. I talked to them a lot about that line break. If I stepped out of my body, I would break. So James Wright is asking you, reader, he's directing your attention there. He's asking you to take that line as its own chunk before moving on. And then, of course, reveals to you into blossom in the next. Otuma's essay talks about loneliness and happiness existing at once, right? Which is a space we all understand and know. And Wright's last two lines, I think, are an amazing example of that, of how they contain both, as our lives do, both the break and the blossom. Is this a poem? It's a pretty famous one. Is it a poem anybody's heard before? Yeah. This is one, actually, this is one we read it, had a good friend read at our wedding. That's how much I like it. Anything you'd like to talk about this one? It's a lot. I know it's a lot to just hear these once and try to take them in. I mean, you got to get the book is the thing, you know, but I'm happy to. Yeah, go. No worries.
I love that her ear was delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. That really was specific. Takes you into his world about what girl, what, beautiful.
Yeah. It's so surprising too, right? That's another leap, right? The biggest leap is the end, but that, and it's teaching, similes and metaphors to early intro poet students. That's a great example of like, here's not to be cliche. Here's how to be really specific and surprising. And everything about that line, the word delicate is just right, I think.
Yeah. Well, while we're talking images,
yeah.
shyly as wet swans.
Mm-hmm.
Really didn't, huh?
Mm-hmm.
That I didn't I didn't picture anything, why, but anyway, but
yeah,
think about it, and shyly as wet swans. I don't think of swans as wet.
or shy. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Think of the necks,
Mhm. The kind of.
and the
They
action.
look
of-
shy.
The action of bowing.
Yeah, I guess what I picture is the right, the kind of curving down of the neck and the head. They are, you're right though, they're not super shy, are they? But they are, their necks seem to me so graceful. And so part of there is a grace about these ponies, right? That he's trying to trying to help us see. But,
Known for a meeting for life.
oh, interesting. Yep, yep. So that's, yeah, that's important.
That line, they love each other.
Yep.
Know something to get.
Yeah. And, right, and the poem is interesting too for how it, there are pairs in here, right? There are the pair of men who show up and then the pair of ponies who greet them and welcome them. So that goes really well too with the idea of swans standing.
Pair of men.
Yeah.
It says,
My friend and me.
oh, true. Yeah, that's a good question.
Oh.
I just assumed they were two men too, but he doesn't actually say that.
No, you're right.
Good.
Yeah, you're right. And Otuma definitely thinks they're two men. Yeah, that's a good question. I have always read it as two men, but you're right. There's not,
Yeah.
no, there isn't evidence of that. Yeah, you're right.
Just for me, I love the Indian ponies
Hmm,
because it pulls to me, just in my own history, value of indigenous views of nature and
hmm,
the beauty, the
Yeah.
sacredness of it all.
yep, yep. Yeah, sacred is a great word. The poem does create a feel I mean, it's a little bit magical, it feels like, right? Like this kind of, and unfolding in this strange space of just off the highway, right? That there is this meeting of these ponies and these friends and yeah, that there is a sacredness and a peace and a kind of, yeah, it feels a little sparkly magical to me.
And
Right.
gratitude for all of this.
For sure.
Gratitude of the simple things of nature.
Yep, absolutely. Right, right.
When he talks about them coming out of the willows, I mean, a willow is not a hard tree. It's usually a tree that's very soft,
Mm-hmm,
comes down, and also usually grows by water, so.
mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I think of that too as like the willows, like a kind of parting as a curtain for them. Like that feels very cinematic to me. A kind of dramatic entrance. Yeah.
What got me was the contrast between the line where they bow shyly and then they love each other, and the next line, there is no loneliness like theirs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
Yeah. What do you think that means?
Well, I think he's talking about the contrast between them loving each other and then they don't want to ever part or something like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I got it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
It's magic to put that second line in.
It sure is. Yeah, the timing is really beautiful there. But it's interesting because I do feel like, especially following They Love Each Other, I think he is asking us to maybe rethink loneliness in a slightly more lovely turn. Like it feels like that's a good thing, that that they're in this world together, and that it feels right to the observer who, I mean, you understand that the speaker is drawn to this place for some reason, right? We don't know the backstory of why they pulled over and why here. It does seem to be like, I feel like there are maybe clues that they've been there before. I guess they've like the speaker knows they've been grazing all day alone. Like maybe at least they've driven by them before and seen the ponies there. But this part of this transformation in the speaker that leads up to this beautiful breaking open of an ending is a kind of gradual opening to, as you said, the nature and the natural world and the gifts it offers, and also its generosity, right? The two ponies don't say like, I'm not up for this. Where did you come from? I don't know you, right? They don't. There's a really lovely generosity and curiosity. And that, I mean, that feeling when that happens, right? Um, it feels like a blessing, right? There's the title, right? That's what it feels like.
I thought about
Mhm.
is that wild horses especially are often in herds.
Hmm,
They are there, just the two of them.
true. Hmm.
They reach out to these other people. But
Yeah, true. I like that.
the loneliness.
Yeah, I like that. Well, and again, like in a very welcoming way, right? Come on over, be part of our herd for the afternoon, for the evening. Good. Yeah,
One more thing.
yeah.
So the first thing that struck me was they're approaching the ponies and they noticed that the eyes of the ponies darken with kindness. And that's like it's like he came there already receptive, kind of to
Mhm.
tune with these ponies because it makes me think, your irises expand or
Mhm.
your eyes darken sometimes with pleasure.
Mm.
They are a key to understanding emotions.
Mhm. Yep.
So there's the welcoming that you're talking about. He's ready for this experience.
Yep. Yep. Right. And that's lovely that as you're saying, he's seeing, somebody else in a different emotional space might walk into this field and see, anger in the darkening eyes, right? Or threat or fear, but he's seeing kindness because here they come, and Gladly's lovely too, right? Because here they're very trusting, right? Here they come, and so what's being reflected to him is this generosity and openness and kindness.
That line about they ripple tensely, it's so physical.
Yeah,
I mean, you can feel that rippling.
Yeah.
When they say that, because who hasn't seen an animal do that?
yeah,
Particularly a horse.
yep. Yep. Also, right. And the kind of scale of a horse, right? To see that in this huge, beautiful body of a horse. Yeah, it's true. It's very bodily based, which is also leading you to the end. If I stepped out of my body, I would, right? Starting in the grounded space of the body. And then, this really, kind of epiphany at the end, right? That I think it's so beautiful. I wish I'd written it. Other thoughts about this one?
Oh, shit,
Yeah.
what the heck?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not a poetry reader,
This book is for you. It's for everybody.
but I am a horse person.
Mm.
Horses are very curious.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them like people, depending on their experience. So they would come over to investigate. But they'd also come over to see if you had any snacks.
Uh-huh. That's great.
Pull their skin often because there are insects on them.
Okay.
So those are some other aspects.
Yeah, I like that.
Maybe don't quite come into play here.
Well, and it's great that, right, the observer is just deciding that that in this moment they're living, they don't, the kind of irritation of insects doesn't have a place here, right? Like they're kind of, yeah, framing this observation through a lens of curiosity and generosity. And yeah, good. Other thoughts?
I just love that at the end where I'm sure we've all felt that sense of awe and wonder,
Mm.
just filling up, almost to the point of tears about
Mhm.
how amazing it is to be alive and
Yep.
see the beauty of the world.
Yep.
Just think, oh my gosh, that last line.
Yeah, I know. And also the breaking, I mean, it can feel that powerful, right? Like, as you say, it brings tears to your eyes. It's a bodily thing, that often, I think it's maybe easier to find in nature, like a sort of, getting out of ourselves a little bit. But the break feels really important as that it's that drastic and that shattering. Yeah.
Last comment.
Yeah.
So breaking, there's a lot of Zen terminology, Zen poetry, imagery, which is just that, you break through, into enlightenment or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting.
That powerful.
Mm-hmm. And that, that goes beautifully with the ending here, right? That, and also the idea that breaking, right, as humans, can feel bad, can feel really awkward. And yet, if we trust that we're headed toward the blossoming, then we can, right, sort of go with it. But first it might feel a little harsh.
We could have spent the whole hour on this one.
I know, it's good, right? You have to go back. I'm just gonna share one more with you because I want to hear other questions that you have. This one I chose, I think you'll like this one too. I chose this one because, as you know, Valentine's Day is coming up this week. It's a big poet holiday. So I'm gonna end here with a love poem. This is a poet I didn't know before I read the anthology. Her name is Leanne O'Sullivan. She's a poet from Cork, Ireland, and the author of 3 poetry collections. She's won many literary awards, including the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature and the Lawrence O'Shaughnessy Award for Irish Poetry. Here's Otuma's introduction.
What number is it? The poem?
Page number?
Yes.
On the poem's on 266. Otuma says, I have bad asthma. So at the start of the pandemic, when so little was known about whether asthmatics were at greater risk or not, I began breathing exercises in earnest. It helped a little. So did poetry. I always find that reading a book of poetry slows me down. During COVID, many of us have thought a lot more about breathing than we did before. And many of us thought a lot more about hospital workers, porters, receptionists, cleaners, managers, administrators, doctors, fundraisers, nurses, ambulance drivers, paramedics than we did before. What helps them? What keeps them breathing? Okay, this poem's called Leaving Early. My love, tonight Fionnuala is your nurse. You'll hear her voice sing song around the ward, lifting a wing at the shore of your darkness. I heard that in another life, she too journeyed through a storm, a kind of curse, with the ocean rising darkly around her, fierce with cold, and no resting place, only the frozen rocks that tore her feet, the light on her shoulders. And no cure there but to wait it out. If, while I'm gone, your fever comes down, if the small salt-laden shapes of her song appear to you as a first glimmer of earthlight, follow the sweet, hopeful voice of that landing. She will keep you safe beneath her wing. Otuma's essay explains that O'Sullivan wrote this poem while her husband was in a coma. Her book, titled A Quarter of an Hour, opens with a few paragraphs explaining that her husband, following a brain infection, lost most of his memory and couldn't recognize her. In that opening to her collection, O'Sullivan says that, quote, this is O'Sullivan herself, more visual to him were the birds and wild animals that he believed he could see during his recovery. And then Otuma adds, knowing that detail, this poem, beautiful without any of that background, takes on even more depth. The poet is speaking to her husband in the language of his dreams, directing his attention to the nurse, saying she's like a bird, lifting a wing at the shore of your darkness. And I would just add that I think something that makes, I think it's a remarkable poem. And I think something part of what makes it so moving, I think, is the form, actually, and the tone that the form conveys. So there's a long tradition of poets writing poems in the form of letters. And as you may know, that's called epistolary poems. And I think that this one, you know, that begins with a direct address, my love, we're immediately settled into this intimate landscape, right? The poem shrinks down to a tiny little constellation of people, really three. And the poem feels to me, I suppose, a little bit like James Wright's poem. This one even more feels to me kind of spoken in a whisper. And what I like about the form, the letter form, is it feels very intimate. It feels a little bit, the poem feels a little like reading this over somebody's shoulder, right? Like we're allowed into this intimate space for the space of the poem. And I do think that the form, you know, poets think a lot about form and what kind of vessel they're going to offer you this idea. How are they going to contain an idea in a vessel, and what does that vessel look like? And I think that the letter form itself, and you know, and its pairing with the language that she's chosen, is such a gorgeous pair, and brings us, you know, in relatively few lines. Right, I think it's 14. There's a stanza break actually between these two chunks, and so could be read also as a sonnet, an Italian sonnet. But I think I was thinking more about the letter form, and that we just get this really, you know, we started talking about Ada Limon and the kind of universality of invisible pain, and the sort of capital T truths that myth can offer us, remind us of. And this one too feels so universal. It's so specific, right? Just like Ada Limon's, there's a very specific you, a very specific nurse, and a very specific speaker, very specific setting. But none of that, I think, gets in the way of our hearts connecting with this little threesome, you know? I think that it expresses in so few words, really, absolutely profound loss and love at the same time. And this was one, I just sort of, I think, I just sort of had to take a minute after this one. You know, I've thought so much about it, and is another one that as Otuma says, you know, you don't. It's interesting to hear for sure that O'Sullivan's husband was very interested in tethered to imagery of animals and birds as he was recovering, but you don't need to know that to appreciate she will keep you safe beneath her wing, right? And I think the title's interesting, right? Leaving early. We don't know what that's about. But also that, I think, speaks to a kind of universality of, like, we know those moments where like we have to go, right? We can't, how do we extract ourselves even momentarily from the people we love the most? And I thought a lot about this poem, and that leaving early, right? It does feel like, you know, this is not like, oh, I'm just going to go take a stroll because it's a beautiful day. There's some urgency that's calling the speaker away, and they'll be back. But that entrusting the nurse and the qualified people who, you know, who care as much about the husband as she does, I think is so a beautiful way to end our little buffet. Yes.
Or he's leaving early.
Or you're right. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but that could be the leaving right, is maybe, right, maybe he doesn't, maybe she doesn't come back to him. Yeah, true.
Yeah, I agree with her that that's
Yeah.
exactly what I was preparing myself for.
Interesting. Yeah,
Early, you know.
yeah,
Okay, this is gonna be,
yeah, interesting.
and then, but she doesn't go there.
Mm-hmm,
So I think that's pretty deliberate.
mm-hmm,
Other ways of,
mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's interesting. She chose leaving early because it doesn't, it's a circumstance, but it. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely there. Yeah, 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 good, yeah.
I love that so many lines are dedicated to this nurse understanding because of her own pain.
Yeah, right, right,
Gosh.
right, right. That too. I mean, poems are such great reminders of so many things, but just that, right, that these caregivers have their own histories, their own difficulties that they've lived through, and maybe those experiences have kind of combined to make them more empathetic. But maybe not, right? Maybe it's just that they've had really hard lives and yet still here they are, caring for those we love. Yeah, I love that too. And we don't, there's no specifics, but it's pretty clear, right? There's a lot of powerful language, like a kind of curse is such an interesting thing to say, right? A storm, a curse, the ocean rising darkly, cold, frozen rocks tore her feet, right? That this is not, she's journeyed through her own pain, whatever that was. Yeah. And you're right, in terms of the kind of balance of how many lines are given what, you're right. A lot of the poem gets, focuses on her background. Yeah, yeah, yes.
Well, sometimes the way you interpret a poem is what's going on in your own life or.
Yep, for sure.
So other than the Irish name at the beginning, what I read that, I understand now that you've explained it about her husband being ill and stuff. But for me, I imagined that this is an immigrant and the life she's had to come to live through, because so much of the poem is about water and
Mm-hmm.
rocks on her feet and
And journeying. Yep.
so I suppose just because that's been so much on my mind lately, and so when I read that, it was just what she has gone through.
Hmm.
So for me, the poem centers more on her journey.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And something that's wonderful about poems is that you're never quite the same person who comes back to a poem. So you can read, a poem can be read, I suggest this to my students, read the same poem once a week and you'll bring new things to it, and whatever is whatever you're thinking about and experiencing on that day, that lens absolutely brings you into the poem in different ways. And I think the one sign of a really good poem, a powerful poem, is that it holds space for all of those interpretations of ours, that it doesn't exclude us and what we're living on any given day. But like, yes, that's in there for sure, right? I mean, that word journeyed is at the end of a line. That's,
both traveling, and her husband,
mm-hmm,
the nurse,
mm-hmm, yep, yep, yes.
Is there something specific that in the poem itself that says this is her husband? Because I also read it as a mom and a child. I read it
Mhm.
as a lover or.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, as I said, if you were reading, I think probably Otuma included that in the anthology, because if you had been reading this poem in O'Sullivan's collection, she includes an introduction, which, and I haven't read the whole book, but I assume speaks to many poems in her book. But no, I don't see, I don't see any specifics like that. In fact, I thought of my own mom. And so I think that's part of the power of the poem, is that, it's whoever it is that you're thinking of as my love, it welcomes you in and offers you something for that person, that narrative. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's the Irish myth that he talks quite a bit about. And of the children of Lear and he basically says, you know, you don't have to know that mythology to appreciate the poem, and he's saying that to write a poem that explores a myth so beautifully is one thing, but to write it in such a way that it doesn't exclude those unfamiliar with the myth is quite another.
Mm-hmm.
I read the poem and then read the commentary, and then I went back and read the poem about that fits so well was was it a swan? Struggling through a storm and its feet being torn on the rocks.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, so there's two images going on, as he said.
Mm-hmm.
So Fanula is one, like an older sister protecting her siblings, that's in the myth, and then, but a trusted nurse helping a man through a coma.
Yep, I can just, so there's a paragraph in the essay that Otuma includes at the end of this poem that, that talks about the Irish myth of the children of Lear. He says it's about 4 siblings, the oldest of whom is named Fanula, meaning fair-shouldered, implying someone with fair hair. In the myth, these 4 siblings were turned into swans by a wicked stepmother, who else, and damned to live in the cold lakes of Ireland forever. Fanula, the oldest sibling, prevented the curse from being permanent, making it so that the curse was only 900 years long. She also ensured that the siblings could retain their own voices. She weathered storms and freezing weather for 9 centuries in the shape of a swan with huge wings. And here she is again, not in a myth, but in a poem, not in a lake, but in a ward. Fanula is, in one light, an older sister protecting her siblings from the worst of a curse. In another, a trusted nurse helping a man through a coma. And no cure there but to wait it out. So that's something really satisfying about this book too, is that, you know, as he admits, like you could read the poem and get plenty, right? That's satisfying and wondrous to you. But I appreciate that context. That's not a myth I had known. And it does add another layer, you know, with the word curse, right? Then we see, oh, okay, that's interesting. But again, it doesn't get in the way of us appreciating it if we don't know.
It kind of elevates the suffering. She
Mhm.
suffered for 900 years.
Right.
But there's something, and there's no cure in either case, but
But to wait it out, exactly.
Well, that's what's so wonderful about his podcast is he reads
Hmm.
the poem
yeah.
with his beautiful voice.
Yeah,
And then he goes on and just talks about it like we have. And
Yeah.
he reads it again and you hear it all.
that's right. That's right. I like that. I like that he repeats it again. That surprised me the first time I heard it, and I thought I think that's the perfect way, right? To read it once and react somehow. And then the second way is just, and that's how he sort of sends you off, right? It's like, okay, take this into your life now, absorb this, and carry it with you. That's what it feels like to me. And it's a beautiful, yeah, the podcast is great. He's great.
We could end this by you reading it again.
Sure. Would you like to hear it once more? Yeah, one more time. Leaving early. My love, tonight, Fanula is your nurse. You'll hear her voice sing song around the ward, lifting a wing at the shore of your darkness. I heard that in another life, she too journeyed through a storm, a kind of curse, with the ocean rising darkly around her, fierce with cold and no resting place, only the frozen rocks that tore her feet, the light on her shoulders. And no cure there but to wait it out. If, while I'm gone, your fever comes down, if the small, salt-laden shapes of her song appear to you as a first glimmer of earthlight, follow the sweet, hopeful voice of that landing. She will keep you safe beneath her wing.
Thanks, Jennifer.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you coming. Thank you for all your comments and questions. Yeah, I feel like we could, I mean, we'd spend all afternoon on this book. I do hope you'll check it out. It's, I love paging through it and sort of seeing what it lands on.
Audio copy.
Oh, right. And Bonnie said the audio is an audio copy, so you could actually hear Padraig O'Tuma, read the poems.
And the podcast, how do you find the podcast?
Just search on Spotify or Apple Music. It's called Poetry Unbound. Or his name.
Is that the name of the?
Yeah, Poetry Unbound, 50 poems to open your world.
It's different.
Yeah. So you'll find it. I mean, 7 million people have found it, so, but yeah, I think you'll really, and they're short, I mean, as short as these little sections are, that's how short, like, his little podcast, is, you don't have to devote an hour to it. It's like 12 minutes. Kind of introduce it with this kind of thing. Read the poem, and then he kind of talks a little bit about it. And reads it again.
That's right, you didn't start.
Really.
Yeah.
It's great to see you too, and then go back and. Thanks. As always.